Hi, I'm Andre. I'm all the way in Vienna. I studied geology. I really neglected science for a lot of my life. Unfortunately, I came back into it after the UAP thing in the Congress started in 2021, and that intrigued me. And then I just dived into it. And thanks to Daniel, I had the opportunity to talk to Professor Avi and Robin Hansen. I hope to have Gary Nolan on my podcast pretty soon. And Leslie Keane had promised me, and Ralph Blumenthal. So I really had the creme de la creme of the people who have a great opinion about this whole UAP topic. Even though I'm not that much of a UAP UFO guy. I mean, I'm old, so for me, UFOs are just kind of like nuts and bolts type of aliens coming from a different, planet or galaxy or wherever. But the more you take a look at the whole topic, it's gotten so wide. The phenomenon is so big, and in the end effect, I think we just end up thinking that the whole thing has more to do with your consciousness, and that's a topic that really interests me. And the whole question, what does life in the universe look like? Where did it come from? Um, I mean, where did it come from? Where is the origin? It had to start somewhere. And are we the first? I had this wonderful discussion with Robin Hansen with the whole theory of grabby aliens in the universe, and it got me thinking a lot about the whole topic. So I'm starting to write this whole thesis on abiogenetic evolution of life in the universe because that really interests me. And you just come into real problematic questions. And the funniest thing is if you look at the whole topic, you realize that the beginning of life had to start somewhere. Okay. And the question is, did it start in one point? Or is it just a mathematical formula? And so carbon life just starts everywhere where it finds the means and the possibilities to do so. And that's an intriguing thing. And I have this kind of basic philosophies that I picked out. And for instance, one of my ideas that I've been working around is that certain things happen at certain times. So like the beginning of life in the universe happens at a certain point in time in universe. And now the further you look at it, and then it gets really obscure because you look at the time arrow. We're used to having the time arrow just going into one direction, just going, boring from left to right or right to left, whatever. It's just going one direction. But right now, scientists are looking at, okay, what happens if, the timeline doesn't go into one direction? So the whole question of where the beginning of life started becomes a lot more complex. So obviously, my whole writing on this whole topic has gotten really complex, and I'm waiting for more scientists to come up with more crazy ideas. Because actually, if you think about it, the crazy people are not the everyday people. I think the crazy people are the scientists. If you actually think about what they're saying, it's absolutely obscure. We have the basic notion that out of a mere energetic environment where there's a probability distribution that expresses itself in a material form. Okay. So if you look at the beginning of the universe, you had nothing. Then there was this big bang, supposedly, if that theory is correct. We don't know. But nevertheless, we have an energetic environment with a probabilistic distribution, and that expresses itself in a material form. And this material form evolves into heavier elements through nucleosynthesis, through whatever explosion or supernova. You get heavier elements and so on and so forth. And you have a wonderful distribution of elements in the universe. And I'm actually having a discussion with an astrophysicist, thanks to Daniel. He asked me to take that discussion with him because I'm actually quite curious if the material distribution in the universe is equal. And is it the same everywhere, even on the widest outskirts of the universe where the galaxies are way older than ours? If the distribution is the same there. But nevertheless, so you have a natural distribution of elements. And out of these elements, suddenly you have this wonderful chemical carbon. And this carbon is just adapted create more complex molecules. And these complex molecules create living beings, that constantly evolve to something that has consciousness. Actually, the universe has created, if you take a look at the whole process, and that's the weird thing about this whole thing, is that the universe has created a self-awareness process. So the universe has, from the immaterial aspect, has created itself in a way that it can look back at itself and say, why the hell am I actually here? Okay. And I think this is such a wonderful, incredible, inexplicable thing that happens, because you have something that immaterial that comes together. And if you look into the details of what is actually happening in the process of this immaterial so that it can become conscious, it's absolutely phenomenal. Let's take for instance, there's this, it's called the Leventhal complexity. So what happens is that in your body, you have amino acids. They kind of twist and turn, and they fold in milliseconds, and they become a protein. And the structure of the protein is extremely important for its function. And that actually, if you think about it, they have this, they actually try to synthesize this whole idea with artificial intelligence. I think it's called alpha folding. They had a supercomputer work on it, and it actually can put 95% of, they finally found a process of kind of artificially recreating these processes, how the amino acids can fold themselves correctly to create the protein that is needed. But we may not forget, it's not only the question of how it folds, but it has to fold correctly in a certain structure so it can be applicable in your body. Now, that gets me thinking. The crazy thing about this whole idea, if you go down on this level, is that you ask yourself, who the hell is in control? Is there a basic formula underlying everything that creates this method of creating consciousness? Is it just a coincidental thing? Because the weird thing is that science actually excludes coincidence or Zufall, as you call it in German. I like the word in German, Zufall. It's kind of like it drops into your lap. Es fällt mir zu. You were certain in German, and in English the translation it's kind of falls to you. So it's an inexplicable kind of a situation, and that's actually quite phenomenal, because science wants to exclude the process of coincidence. But if you look at the whole thing, the explanation of everything is coincidental. So it's not really it's a weird thing. And that made me realize that science is actually only a description. Science is not an explanation. And I think this is what a lot of people get wrong. Even the scientists get wrong, because an explanation would tell you why something's happening, and the why is a very personal perception of the universe. And that's the difficult for the phenomenon we're taking a look at. So what does have the whole thing to do with the whole thing that's going on below? Because if you look at this Leventhal, there's amino acids that are just like combining themselves in a certain structure, in a certain form, so it can do its function in a proper way. I ask myself, is there something underlying the whole thing? Is there a basic formula that actually dictates beyond the coincidence that, okay, you might have so and so many reactions, and that might coincidentally express itself in a certain way that it might be beneficial for you. But in certain environments, there might be an underlying formula under which everything lies. And this is what I'm really interested in, because also if you look at your zygote, so if you look, the man produces sperm, the woman produces eggs. There's something within your body. And I'm not a biologist. I would love to talk to Gary Nolan about this, because I ask myself, okay, half of your DNA is being taken, cut out of your chromosomes and being taken, and it says, okay, this is viable for the, is that a coincidental thing? Or is there a higher plan in that, So the problematic about discussing this is because most of the people most scientists would say, oh, it's coincidental. You have like 7 billion people, and there to take out this information, there this information, and whether information is viable for survival, it will pertain. But survivability does not necessarily explain why certain things pertain in the history and evolution, because certain information might get lost and certain information might be necessary. So it's a very, very complex situation. So if you look at the whole thing, the whole evolution, the complexity that you have, is there a possibility that we can take this coincidental evolution and progression of life within the universe and put on the deterministic side? And even physics is thinking about the same thing. So you can go into the quantum realm and you see in Bell's theorem that they're thinking about the same crazy stuff. They're thinking about determinism, indeterminism, in the causality of the whole quantum realm, okay? And then it gets really obscure. And that's when I just lean back and I says, you know what? You scientists are all really freaking out of your mind, because what the hell you're talking about has no relevance for anybody out there, And the deeper you go into the whole phenomenon, you got to ask yourself, okay, in how much is the material really that important? Is it the consciousness that's perceiving the whole thing maybe more important than the actual fact that it's a causal, linear direction of reality that expresses itself in a certain way? So it gets really, very, very complex the further you go down the rabbit hole. So I work myself down, then I get lost, and I work myself back up, and so like, where the hell are we? So if I look back, if we go back to the whole question, actually the most important thing that we actually, if you would take a look at the UAP, a UFO topic, I don't like the word UAP. For me, it's still UFOs, because still I don't know that. It gets complex, because if you talk about UAP, we're accepting the fact that, okay, these things might be, which I lovingly call Atlantis theory. It might be some whatever alien or unknown species living among us, okay, like Atlantis or whatever. I don't know. I think it's kind of crazy. The other people are talking about, well, it might be time travelers. The other people are talking about they might be interdimensional. And I think we should differentiate between inter and intra-dimensional. The difference is between interdimensional, that's my definition, by the way, is a copyright on it. No, interdimensional actually means that like the dimensions are separate from another, so you have to travel from one dimension to another dimension. Intradimensional is like it's all in one, which the idea which I actually favor. And then you have the typical old UFO, UAP hypothesis that you have like aliens coming from some distant planet. But you cannot exclude the question of consciousness. What the hell are we perceiving in our reality? And I'm really curious. And I think the big step would be if we finally would find some fossil on Mars, we fly to whatever, Enceladus or Ios or Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn, and land there, and we actually find primitive life. Then it would open up in our minds. Right now, we're still stuck with this whole idea. Is it possible? Are we the first? Are we the only ones? And that question is not solved. I mean, we're quite frank about it, where it's still an open question. So before I go rambling for the next 3 hours, what do you guys think?
Since we talked about consciousness, what do you think? When does consciousness start?
In a lifetime, or basically?
For us humans, what do you think? When does consciousness start? I mean, were you conscious about yourself when you were a year old or 2, or in the womb of your mother already? What do you think? When does it start? I always wonder, when does consciousness start?
That's a fantastic question. And I like the German word again. I think German has a wonderful way of describing certain things, because it's called Bewusstsein is consciousness. And that's kind of more like the word self-awareness. Okay. So I want to differentiate that between Bewusstsein, which is a form of being I am. Okay. That's like an egocentric perspective of what is. And I think consciousness is, for me, something that stands above everything. I kind of have the feeling, and this is because I write. I haven't written for a long time now. Since I'm doing this podcast, I'm writing a lot, and I realize sometimes you write and you ask yourself, where the hell did that come from? Or where the heaven did that come from? It's like it's a spiritual kind of, it just happens, you like look at the words, and one day you like, and the next day you're like, oh my God, that's BS. That's forget it, throw it overboard. But basically, I think there is a consciousness that in which we can have contact with. And if you remember, we had the discussion with Greshel last week, I think it was. And I kind of like this perspective in this whole thing. I think there's a consciousness beyond us in which we can tap in. And I say this is speculation. I can't prove it. And I think this is a big thing for science. How the hell can we prove our thoughts can be connected to something that might be universal? I think that's a very challenging aspect. And that's why if I look at the whole question about UAP, UFO, and what the whole phenomenon thing, if you ask me who's going to be the first person who's going to be able to pinpoint something and say, you know what, I think there's something going on, and I have the data, we can prove it, I think it's going to be Gary Nolan. I think it's going to be, before anything physical, be James Webb or even Professor Avi Loeb. I just don't think the physicality of the question is the big question. I think we're in the precipice in our society of changing our perspective of what is real. And we're not the only ones asking these questions. We're not only the esoteric people. We're asking these questions for, decades, hundreds of years. We're actually scientifically asking ourselves, what the hell is reality? And which part of consciousness is this taking part of? And I'm just sometimes, it's phenomenal if you're Sir Roger Penrose, if you listen to him, what he talks about. And I had this incredible, watch this, I think there was a Kutchamangal on the theory of everything. I forget the name of the people who were there. And they were talking about consciousness, where it could come from, and they were talking about the quantum realm, so to speak. It sounds like Marvel Universe. I don't know why Disney doesn't jump onto this. I don't know if we get sued if we mention Disney here, but it's just absolutely phenomenal that we cannot exclude, and it's obvious because I'm a solipsist, which means I cannot objectivize my subjective what experience. I cannot, I don't even, because it's just happening in there, so everything that's happening in right now is just in my head. It's not out there, it's in my head. So I think this question is going to be the big thing. And if you ask me, I think the cognitive sciences, consciousness, cognitive, neurological sciences, the interesting studies that they're doing now with DMT and LSD, I think are going to open a lot more doors than we all think, and to answer this whole big question, what is life? What is our perception of life, of our reality? Life, I meant actually reality. What is our perception of reality? I think it's going to get really a lot more complex in the idea of how our brain works, because actually it's incredible what is in our body that actually decides what is relevant or not. There's a process in our mind that, and I mean, where our DNA kind of predestines our biochemical setup in our body. So we produce biochemical hormones and proteins and whatever in our body that influence the processes that happen in our brain, which neurons are activated. Okay. Then we have obviously our environmental input, our psychological input, and everything. So that gets a little bit more complex. But if you look at this whole level of this hierarchy of where all these things happen, you ask yourself, what part of your brain decides what is relevant for you or not? And these are questions that are just I find Gary Nolan is the only one who's really getting into these kind of questions, because he's looking at this whole thing that he was studying, this I forget the name of the part of the brain that's put something in your brain, that he's been studying with the people that had these negative experience with Skinwalker Ranch and so on and so forth. And he saw that, okay, some neurons might have been kind of damaged. So the brain has found new neurological links in the brain, and that enabled them to experience things in a different way. Wow, that is an incredible statement. So that means our whole aspect of reality is such a relative thing, you know? And the question is, where is the freedom of choice? Is the freedom of choice within you? Is there some part of you that we can still kind of alter everything? I mean, so these are really difficult questions, because the basis of the whole thing is, after all, if you ask me why we're not in contact with all these phenomena, it's because our consciousness is not able to do that. And that's why I think Gareth Nolan is in the right approach to find out a way how to prove the whole thing, you know, or at least find scientific data to say, okay, look, we got to follow down this rabbit hole to see why some people are experiencing this phenomenon and others are not. Okay, but the bigger question is, how do we gain the majority of the people on this wonderful planet Earth to understand that we have a phenomenon going on, and there is a phenomenon going on, and I'm convinced about that. And no, I don't know what it is. I'm just speculating. I'm thinking. I'm going down the rabbit hole. I'm listening to a lot of people. I read a lot of books and read a lot of scientific papers, and I haven't got any wiser. I just found that all these people who know a lot more than I do have the same thoughts that I do, you know. And I think this is the whole process of what we're sitting here talking, and the people who are listening might catch on to it and might think, okay, wait a minute. We've got to sit back and actually really maybe think there is another way of approaching reality than we are doing right now. But it gets difficult.
Maybe religion could be another block in that step forward too. You know what I'm saying? Thinking outside the box, because religion is worldwide and influences a lot of people. And I like to think about the primitive religions when they first started. Like, they worshiped the weather. Basically, that's where those were the first gods. And then you see like a shift in ancient man, that they're drawing on walls of like these creatures that they're interacting with, like the Native Americans and the Eastern Indians were interacting with the gods that came down with the flying vimanas. And just the technology that they're describing in holy books. Maybe they didn't have the right vocabulary, but again, I think, religion is kind of like another blockage of some people that just don't want to think a little bit further about consciousness. And
I'm split about, I agree with you totally. I'm split about religion. On one hand, I think it's a very useful tool, because without that, I think we'd be swimming in it's like swimming in the ocean at midnight without any moon, no light, nothing. And you don't know what's up, what's down. Are you swimming up? Are you swimming down? It's a scary thought. And I think that's why there is religion for a certain thing. On the other side, I think I think it was a book from Graham Hancock, where he wrote about, was it Graham Hancock? I read too much, can't remember the names. and he was talking about ayahuasca. And I thought that was really very, very interesting, because I do believe, and this is another aspect about the whole phenomenon, there are psychedelics out there. And I believe the studies of psychedelics will actually open up our understanding of our cognitive and conscious processes in a way that we did not expect. I actually read somewhere, I think it was Johns Hopkins University, that they're giving volunteers. I think it's time I went over there for DMT experiments. And what they did, because DMT, I think, is a very short experience. And so they're doing it on kind of like a drip, so you can stay in the experience a lot longer. Or is it in London? I can't remember where they're doing it, in London or Johns Hopkins. I don't want to say something that's not quite correct. I just get things mixed up sometimes, read too much. Anyways, what they're doing is they're giving these people the same psychedelic experience at the same time. And they want them to go to this other realm and come back and find out if they actually were able to meet and communicate on the other side. Now, bam, if that's possible, then we got to really say, okay, wait a minute, what the hell's going on? Okay. Because if they're able to take that experience, let's say over an hour, go over there, wherever on the other side is, okay, meet their frogs and whatever aliens or whatever they do, and they go on the other side. It's a very mystical experience, and they come back, and they were able to communicate on the one side, remember it, and kind of extrapolate their experience. Then I think we're in a new realm. Then we have to kind of, everybody's got to kind of pull the handbrake. New cars don't have handbrakes anymore, but in the old cars they used to have handbrakes. Or and you like say, okay, what the hell is going on? Because then we have to understand that our reality is not solely this. There is something way beyond that. Okay, and I think those studies will just open up a whole new rabbit hole which you have to go follow down, and it's going to take a lot of time. But I think that's why I said this cognitive, conscious, neurological sciences is a bigger future, and actually arithmetically trying to locate. Okay, unless of course James Webb kind of suddenly finds whatever a TV message from an alien species, and we're like, oh my God, they had the Terminator just as much as we had, whatever. I sometimes jokingly think, what the hell? We've been sending out electromagnetic waves for about 100 years. What happens if an alien species, like, I don't know, got contact of Donald Duck and they think that's the way we look like? I said, oh my God, they got speaking ducks. Oh, that's incredible. And why does he only wear a t-shirt up to here, nothing below, It's not surprising that all the aliens come here are half nude, or whatever. I don't know. It's weird. This is the other thing that I actually think aliens have bad taste, because all the descriptions I had up to now with aliens, they're not wearing any cool stuff. They don't have any nice clothes on. They all look kind of like boring, Even their spaceships look boring. They don't even have a toilet or possibilities to shower. So hygiene is also different perspective in their society. So the whole thing has gotten really weird, So I personally think, it would be awesome. I really hope that we have a kind of pipette feeding of disclosure, that the first informations we get about alien species and everything will be something over James Webb, or Avi Loeb will say, hey, wait a minute, Oumuamua, it did like spawn some, like you said, some little drones out there, and we spotted one or the other, and it's actually kind of more down to earth. I would feel more comfortable with that. Everything else is so way beyond us that I believe that we need some type of form of belief that we don't actually go bonkers, because I think this is something most of the people in this UFO community don't realize. If this whole topic turns out to be true, but they're way beyond us. I'm talking about way beyond us. Then we have a fudging problem. We have a fudging problem. We will not be able to accept it. Just look at the way we treat ourselves. If we think somebody else is on top of you, he's a little bit more elbowy and so on, how you feel. We're not going to be able to accept that. We're just so used to being on top of the food chain that I think this whole psychological aspect of the whole thing is going to be way beyond that than most people expect. So I think that's why, coming back to the whole religion question, I think it's good that people have their beliefs. I personally believe you should have your beliefs privately. You should not induct it on other people. I think that's a prerequisite of what you believe. But everybody has the freedom to believe in what they want, and they should do that. And if it gives them hold, it's good, because we may not forget, the majority of the people, I don't think, if aliens land, I don't know, I don't care where, in Wisconsin, for instance, and they come out and they show themselves. I don't know if we can really handle that as a society. What do you think?
Yeah, like I think like the religious folks might just be jumping off the rooftops, or maybe might find something in all of the I don't
What
know.
would be your first question if you actually had an alien in front of you?
Holy fuck.
Holy fuck, that would be your first question.
No,
they would say, "Let me think about it. I'll come back in 10,000 years."
no, just I don't know, man. I think this is the shock in the fact I'd probably ask about us. Like, you must know, like, where we came from.
Where we came from, that would be your first question, kind of like.
Yeah.
You know, that's a really kind of intriguing thing, because I was often thinking about it. Okay, like if I had the possibility to whatever consciously channel myself, like some people claim they get. I read a couple of books about channeling, and I read this one book that I actually believe, because it kind of confirms to my philosophy. But the first question that I kind of was thinking about it would be, yeah, what about, do you have a Jesus or deity or something like that? But actually, I'm way beyond that. I don't care about those questions anymore. The real actual question is what the hell are you looking for? What are you interested in? That's what I'm actually interested in. What is their curiosity? Because that's something and that's the basic thing. I also last week in the discussion is that I think consciousness is a real phenomenon. It's an unusual. I don't think life is such a phenomenon. I think it's all over the universe. But I think the forms of consciousness and the way it forms due to the environment and where it is expresses a certain type of consciousness. Okay. So we're on Earth, we have abundance of organic life. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. And how this life interacts. I mean, we were talking about just ayahuasca, just the whole idea. How the hell did they find ayahuasca? This thing has a biochemical interaction with our brain that does something. Is that coincidental? I have no idea. So, I mean, coming back to Graham Hancock, I believe that he wrote that the original paintings on the wall from the Stone Age people is that they actually found out that most of the plants out there have psilocybin out there, or some hallucinogenic properties, and they ate all this stuff and they were all boned out of their head and they were really high, so they were drawing these drawings. Because actually the phenomenal thing is, even I think the paintings of 70,000 years ago in the caves in France and South Africa, turn of the century, in Indonesia, they showed the same symbols, like half animal, and like in Anubis, I think it was like this kind of, what was it, like a cat face and human body, and this kind of transformations. And they actually found that in a lot of these trips that these peoples have, that they have these kind of experiences. See these certain serpent people, these kind of. So they're actually all having the same phenomenon, this kind of experience. So what I'm getting at is that our diverse planet has this incredible symbiosis within itself that we're just starting to discover. So I asked myself, what about a culture or civilization on a planet where there are only 3 species? They don't have this abundance that we have. There are only 3 of them. They don't even eat each other. They're like black smokers. They chew off whatever ammonium or something, and they have a different way. The whole cultural conscious experience, and they evolve too, and they become conscious. The whole environmental aspect of how the way they can perceive consciousness and reality is totally different. So I think the question of how consciousness evolves in the universe. The universe is, in a way, like I said before, as being a self-reflecting process. Okay, from the material to the conscious. It'll be so interesting for me to understand what is another culture interested about. What is their curiosity? Why are they here? What are they trying to discover? Because after all, and I think this is a big problematic, also the discussion we had last week, and I'm just preparing my next blog on the whole discussion we had last week. I think us human beings have a little bit of a difficult way of understanding how a different alien species could think. Okay, because we always extrapolate it from our experience, how we deduct things. I even question if our process of deduction is correct, if there's not a different way of going about getting a conclusion. You ask me, if nobody's asking me why, so I'm asking myself, why would I come to this kind of aspect? Because I find it rather strange. It would be rather easy for nature to produce something like a chip, coincidentally have a whole process of reaction with silicon, and you get a chip, and it's 0 1 0 1 0 1. It's quite simple. If you look at us as a human body, as a human experience, our whole body, it's so much more complex. But in our deduction process, we don't have 0 1 0 1. We have empathy. We have biological processes that include a lot more that enable us to come to a conclusion. Okay, so it's very interesting that nature has found that we can discuss it in depth if empathy or all this emotional aspect of our beingness is a part of the basic primordial instinct of survival. Okay, that's one discussion, and believe me, I've thought about all these crazy stuff before, but let's just leave that out for a second. Nature has created a phenomenal brain, okay, that is able to deduce things in an incredible precision. If you just look at the sciences, I mean, sometimes I look at it, it's incredible. So, and this is all induced through an environment and through where we live. And a different species and from a different civilization, from a different planet, will have probably a whole different biochemical setup, a whole different process of deducing things and understanding things. And that's why I would be interested in why, or what are they interested in? What are they curious about? Because it will be a whole different aspect from our understanding. Okay. So I'm trying to be very brief with all my thoughts, and I'm probably lost everybody. And my wife would be saying, God, you're rambling again. Shut up.
No, you're a good talker and a storyteller. No, it's really in depth. Again, there's just so many theories and different rabbit holes to go down. You're right. Once you go down one, it just opens another door. We have to keep going down. And yeah,
it's kind of scary, isn't it?
It is. It's
because there is no end to it. Because once you think and I always think of Jacques Vallée. He always said, when you think you've kind of scratched the surface of one thing, you're like, oh my God, there's something else. And you keep scratching. And then, there's so many levels of this here, and I think the basic satisfaction that we need as a humankind is the understanding that there is something that goes beyond that, what we believe is necessary for us to survive. And that's where we get back to religion. But once we have this fundamental awareness that there is something grander than coincidence, everything, life, whatever, was some biochemical process that coincidentally happened, and everything is just coincidence. And it just happened that the universe came together, expanded, whatever, bang, and here we are. Like Roger Penrose says, there's like this, even when after the universe expands to the most extremist point, we all freeze into nothingness, but there is still this slow, long electromagnetic wave that might endure, and if we're lucky, we might discover this long, whatever. Wow, bloody hell. No, that's not what we need. What we need as a human race is right now that we see that the next step is feasible. And I think the next step that we cannot conceive right now, that we're bound. I think I love what Eric Weinstein says. Great guy. I hope I can talk to him someday. Is that he says, we are still bound to this Einsteinian philosophy of our reality. So that means that this whole question of causality, the way, time goes only one direction, is so bound to our whole perception of what we can do. And that makes, the whole, but I would also include thermodynamics, it really bounds the whole question of what the system is, because within the system, there are certain rules. And if we cannot break out of that, I think we'll have a difficult time to discover a new path for society, because we need energy. We need a different form of understanding how we can go about. I mean, if you look at what we're still doing, is all what we're doing is we're creating heat. We're, what we're doing is, no matter, even in nuclear fusion, I mean, this is what really gets me. We're not creating direct energy, electricity. We're creating heat. We're, turning a turbine, and that creates the energy we need. That's ridiculous. It's absurd. That's like 19th century. We're still steam engine.
Yeah.
We haven't got back beyond the steam engine. And that's something that really just, das fuchst mich, you would say in German. That really pisses the shit out of me, if I can swear for once. I've been holding back now for about, I don't know how long I've been talking right now. But I mean, that's absurd. There must be a vision beyond that. And the question of what space and time is, and going back to my whole problematic situation, why I think the question can be answered more likely in consciousness. If you remember on the beginning, I said we had this Atlantis theory, that live amongst us, the aliens or whatever they are, inter or intradimensional, inter being a dimension apart from us, intradimensional, the dimensions being within us, time travelers, or aliens from a different distance galaxy or whatever, or a planet. If you really think about it, they're not very different. Because if you're able to travel from one planet instantaneously, no matter what, to our planet, okay, instantaneously, maybe instead of taking 5,000 years, you can do it in 5 minutes or 500 years or whatever, they come here quickly. Or you're a time traveler or a dimensional traveler, you cannot tell the difference. It's going to be the same thing.
Yes.
For us, as whatever we perceive and we measure, we will not know the difference. It's just implausible, all this. Actually, the most plausible thing is that these bastards are right here on Earth, and they have never been found it worthwhile to talk to us, because they thought we're like, oh, the human beings, leave them alone, boring people. They're just killing each other, and they're screwing up the Earth and everything, so they're very impolite. If they're living with us and they don't even bother communicating with us, I think that's actually quite sad. There was a very interesting book called Der Schwarm. Did you ever read that?
Yes.
So I think it was a Danish writer, really fantastic book, worthwhile to read. Maybe we could put a link in below. I think it's a fantastic book because it actually goes into the theory that there is a being amongst us, and it kind of suddenly talks to us. But if we take a look at the whole thing, and I think this is a big question, and I just recently watched this show by Sabine Hossenfelder. I love all her. I watch all these crazy scientists, and she says, the question of time having one arrow is not such a big deal, and I think it is, because after all, if you think you can go faster than the speed of light, then you're basically a time traveler, and then basically I think you're a dimensional traveler too, because what the hell is the difference? But then the question is, can you really live with the thought, with causality does not exist, that the time arrow does not go in one direction? What does deductive thinking mean? It kind of you kind of end up in a place where you as a human being think a lot of things that I think it just doesn't make sense. You were kind of reverted to almost a shamanistic type of perspective that time and reality is all relative. And I don't think we're prepared for that. And that's why we come back to religion. I think people will need a certain type of hold. And I think, I hope they all step up. I'm actually pretty surprised how the Vatican, and I'm not religious at all. I'm agnostic. I don't even know what I believe in. I believe in something, but I don't even know what I believe that I believe. So that gets really problematic if you don't know that. But I think it's a very important aspect of reality that the Vatican has actually said, well, probably there are aliens out there, and they also had Jesus, which I think is a really cool thing, a perspective of the whole thing. But I think in the end effect, we will need these kind of stepping stones, and it will be up to the religions of the world to step up to a new idea and how they can adapt their doctrine that they had for so many years and centuries to adapt to this new idea that our reality is changing, because after all, that's what's happening. And I keep on thinking, I remember in the 20th century, I'm that old that I can think of the 20th century. They always spoke of the age of Aquarius. And I think this is really happening right now. This is kind of like a little bit awakening. We can't go on the way we've been going on. We've got to change. We've got to change our perspective of reality. We've got to change. And I'm in the process of doing that. I'm listening to all these people, and we're all in this whole big prospect. And some will think a little bit deeper, but we would need on one level somebody who's be able to communicate it, this incredible reality that's just right in front of our noses. It's like a glass door. Our noses are pressed on the glass door. We're looking beyond, but we can't grasp it yet. And it'll be there, but we'll need people to take us. It's not only going to be the scientists. It's going to be a lot of clergymen and religious people who are going to help the majority of people over this hurdle. And I really hope that they're all onto this, because it's going to be for the more. There are a lot of people on this planet. We need to not convince them, but we've got to carry them over intellectually, emotionally, spiritually onto the other side and say, look, there's going to be something, it's not that horrific as you think. Mm-hmm. Mind you, I do think it's horrific.
Yeah, you're right. I think the Vatican needs to get people ready. Just in general, maybe the Dalai Lama. Somebody that's higher up.
You think the Dalai Lama? I don't know. I know. I think the guy is so way above everything. I don't know. I listened to a lot of these things that he's been saying about these topics and more, and I'm always fascinated. I think the guy's awesome, but in the end effect, I think the big question is that we all have: are we as a human species really up to the next step? Can we do the next step? And that the next step means asking ourselves, do we need this ferocity, this aggressiveness, this taking environments for ourselves? Do we need this aspect? This is what Robin Hanson talks about in this grabby alien philosophy. Is this really something embedded in us that we really have to do, that this is the way that we can survive? Is this the real necessity of the whole thing? Or is there something beyond that? And I think we can't really see that. We're still in this process of thinking that we need to protect ourselves, and sometimes we need to take the next environment beyond ourselves to protect ourselves. And then, where do you stop? You go around the globe, you end up with yourself. And I think that's a big question. I truly hope that there is something beyond that. I can't see it right now. I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand why we're having wars, why, every 30 seconds somebody's dying of starvation and a kid is dying. It breaks my heart every time. I think we have the possibility. We live in this luxury. We talk over internet. We have created all this here on the backs of people who are working in mines in Africa that bring out lanthanides and to get like $1 a month or something. It's actually shocking. And we can't get out of this, because we need this to live our lives. But we're actually, we have to be all, if we believe in a spirit, if we're in any way spiritual, we need to pull the handbrake and says, this cannot be that we live our luxury on the life of others. And I truly believe this. This is a real big stepping stone. I mean, this has nothing to do with UAPs and so on and so forth, maybe in a farther sense. But as long as we don't open up our minds that we're actually costing other people's livelihoods and lives and unhappiness, it's not the way. I don't believe it is. That's not the way of survivability. I believe in symbiosis. I believe in this, that, everything, as a geologist, I can say everything that has survived millions of years is only that has worked in symbiosis, have found a way to work together. And that's why I come to this kind of assimilation idea that I spoke of last week with Gershel. Unfortunately, I think I have to explain that a little bit better. I remember reading this one book about this one guy that channeled with some alien beings. I was totally intrigued, and they're all keeping us kind of dumbed down, and we kind of can do our stuff, but we cannot get out of a certain intellectual level or consciousness level. And that resonated with me. And I started thinking, if you think about a symbiosis and assimilation, and that's exactly what happens, is that when you assimilate something into your beingness, and I don't only mean physical, I understood now that a lot of people misunderstood me. Assimilation doesn't mean that I'm necessarily biologically assimilated in a bigger biological being, even though that's what I think. We can talk about that later. But I think its consciousness can be assimilated into a bigger objective. And the question is, in the process of assimilation, is it necessary for us to understand what the higher prerogative is of that thing in which we're being assimilated in? And that's the big question. Do we have the capacity or the possibilities to understand that, or do we understand that? And I give the example in biology. If you look at in our body, the mitochondria that gives us energy, where the ATP is inside and so on and so forth, it's actually its DNA, its basic code is alien to our cells. So some way, that's where a lot of paleontologists and scientists actually explain, somewhere where this prokaryote integrated or eukaryote integrated another thing into its system and found, oh, wow, it can give me energy. So they kind of were happy together, and the mitochondria didn't want to do more. It just liked what it was doing. So it was assimilated. It didn't question its position in this other singular cell organism. Now, I think that's interesting, because I think that's exactly how things happen. I think we're assimilated in societies. I think we're psychologically assimilated. We're physiologically assimilated in certain things. And maybe we're not up to it yet to understand the bigger prerogative question under which we are assimilated under. And I think this is something that I'm taking a closer look at, because there is something to it. Why are we falling back to similar patterns? Why do we psychologically and socially, psychologically, in a bigger aspect, have such difficulty to adapting to new situations? We revert to old situations, old patterns are a lot easier for us to accept, and we actually, fantasize about whatever monarchs and all these kind of crazy ideas. Bloody hell, that's all kind of really stupid. We have really psychologically a difficult time to evolve in our perspective of how things can move ahead. That's why I think this assimilation theory has a possible question. And that's why I also think we need religions and other things to psychologically help us get over this one hurdle that's right in front of us. We're stuck in front of this one hurdle that we can't get over. We're still waging wars. We're still selling weapons. We're still making money off, just creating gunpowder. And it's madness. It's madness. I think I like the way Elon Musk approaches. If we really want to survive, and if we're the only ones in the universe, because right now we don't have any other proof, real proof. I mean, there's proof, but there's kind of like proof that we can present to the public and say, we got proof. We need to really reconsider our position, because there's no way. We've got to conquer our solar system. We've got to move ahead and see how we can live, which bumps into a whole lot of other ethical questions. Yeah.
God. Since we talked about proof, before we recorded, we talked about Gary Nolan and those artifacts that he has. Can we call it artifacts? I don't know. Can we call it artifacts? And Dustin was talking about this sphere. Who had this sphere?
As far as I remember, it was in one of the shows was Coulter and Bryce Sable. They came up with this kind of sphere, and I think it's in the hands of Gary Nolan, who's devised a machinery to analyze the material.
I think J. Allen Hynek too touched on this case.
Yes, that's a bet sphere. I think that's where the whole idea of this, that's really intriguing.
Mm-hmm. Because this thing would actually move around on its own and follow these people in their house.
What?
Yeah, some really crazy shit.
Is there any proof to it? Is there like a video?
Well, they gave it up to the government, and the government
Never gave it
said
back.
anything. Never gave it back, and didn't say
No,
anything
they got
about
something back, but they claim it's not the same. It wasn't the same thing.
It was a painted bowling ball they got back. But
yes, exactly.
where does this sphere come from, Dustin? Where did they get it?
It came from the sky, apparently, or apparently I think this woman here saw there was a fire, a bushfire in the backyard or somewhere near their house, and they went after. They went out. They went to the area where they had this fire, and then they found this ball just chilling there.
Damn.
And they picked it up, and then they found out they had some strange properties where it would follow them around the house, or it really weird stuff. It was like the texture and the weight of it was really odd. I don't know. Dr. Hynek was very impressed by it.
I think it's coming back to life now, because we're talking about orbs, and orbs is round, and you think of that, and so on and so forth. It's I'm very intrigued about that. I'm very, very curious what Mr. Gary Nolan, if you're listening to this,
it's almost kind of like the Foo Fighters, almost kind of like the same shape.
Yes,
same size. Actually,
do we have to kind of parse this whole thing? I mean, I think there's a certain evolution about the whole perspective of the phenomenon. And if I look at Hessdalen, we kind of have like these lights going around. We're not quite sure what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's a nice pic. Wow.
It's actually, I own this photograph.
Really?
I have a huge series. Yeah, this is back in 1940s or 1950s.
Looks like with the plane, it looks like 1950s almost. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like some kind of bomber. But again, in the back of this photograph, it said, oh yeah, here it is. B-36 was taken, and then an F-84 crashed nearby. And you hear about the Foo Fighters actually messing up people's electronics in their aircrafts and stuff like that. So it's kind of intriguing to me that another plane crashed near this photograph where it was taken. So
what's your take on this whole thing? That, I mean, if you look at the Trinity from Jacques Vallée, that happened, I think, almost a year and a half before Roswell. How come these things crash all the time?
Because I think it does take a toll on a machine going across the universe super fast. Kind of like what we do with our own machines. You know, we push it to the limit, and sometimes they explode. I don't know.
Oh, God. You mean they're like all like Formula One drivers? They're like, oh, gives a shit. Crank it up, crank it up. Oh my God, that was too much. Pull up.
Or years of use. I have no idea.
Or you mean like after traveling the universe, they were bored and they
were
like
exactly.
trying to like, let's try to take this tight turn. Oh my God, that was too tight. Oh, bam. I am always intrigued about that. And that's when I come again. I think the idea of interdimensionality could be an issue here, because even with space travel, and if you go in that speeds, you're very likely to bump into something.
Yeah.
I think that the whole traveling thing can be more problematic than we think. But the other thing, what do you guys think? I mean, one of the reports there are a couple of reports that really absolutely fascinate me. One was the aerial in Zimbabwe, I think, that John Mack was talking about. The other one was in Westall in Australia, where this UFO landed. Kids saw it, got some messages and things. That, and what really got me, and beyond all my weird speculations and BS talking, and I'm just, thinking a lot. Those reports really got me when I listened to them when they were grown up and they interviewed the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
That really went under my skin. But then I think, what the hell are these UFOs landing in Africa and in Australia? Why there?
You know what? The Ariel school case is one of my favorite cases all time.
Mine too.
Yeah, there were so many witnesses, and I got the chance to talk to one of these witnesses. His name is Francis, and I met him in Frankfurt at a convention. His story was great, and it was so believable.
Tell us. So what did he basically say?
He himself, he didn't get those telepathical messages, but he spoke with the other children back then, and it told him what they received, like just the way he presented it to me, and he told me about how these things came down and how it happened. It was so.
How did the aliens look like? I kind of now when he's grown up, I saw drawings what the kids drew, but did he talk about what you saw?
I asked him, but I don't remember. I don't remember right now what he told me about that. I invited him to the podcast, and I tried to contact him a lot of times now via WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook, but he didn't get back to me. He said,
I'd love to talk to him. I'd love to talk to him. I mean, I honestly, the aerial. Now I'm going to get speculative. I think this whole question about why they appear somewhere, okay, has to do with consciousness, information, and space. And we can have a whole podcast on this, okay? Because I think this is something, it's a local deterministic thing where they understand that information given there will have a certain effect over time and space and wouldn't have somewhere else. I think there's a purpose why they landed there. I don't think an alien species with the knowledge that they have, and if they do travel over space and time, then they have a whole different perspective of whom to tell what. I give you an example. If you would want to change anything in your life, at one point of your life, would you go back and tell yourself whatever you want to tell yourself?
I think there's no sense in going back and change something that you did or said.
But there might be, I agree with you totally. I wouldn't want to change anything in my life. But if it would be a necessity to give an information, you would really carefully think about where you would want to go to. It would not be something arbitrary, also zufällig. You know what I mean? There would be a certain point where you would, and if your understanding goes beyond what we understand about reality and consciousness and information, how information is set within time and space and everything, it's really complex. I think there's a purpose why that happened where it did. And that's where I agree with Jacques Vallée. I think what he said about the crashes is it's like almost like a gift. There was a purpose in that when it happened and where it happened. I don't say I understand it, but I think in the bigger concept, if I like to I go down the rabbit holes, but then I kind of like pull myself up and I try to take a look at the meta perspective. The meta perspective, after all, is that information is part of everything. Everything is information. In the essence, every quantum of reality is actually only information. Even every quantum and every molecule is only there to give you the information that it is, whatever it is, a piece of metal, a screen, or whatever it is. So for us, it is only information. So if you understand in that information has a relevance in a certain position in space and time, and once we start wrapping our heads around this kind of concept, I think our understanding why certain things happen at certain times becomes totally different, okay? And then the whole question, if the time arrow can go in both ways, okay, then information becomes more important in space because time becomes, because it goes in both directions, go whatever, or more directions. I even hypothesize that who knows, maybe time has more axes. We only, space has like 3 axes, that's space, but maybe time does only have 1 axis. What happens if there are more axes to time? I actually found physicists who are trying to explain quantum phenomenon in the T2 environment, and they were able to explain certain things a lot better, but it was very, very, very complicated, obviously, because you can't phantom it. But the whole process of what is information in space and time becomes a whole different importance if you look at in the meta perspective of what it all means to us, because actually it's only information. And if you look at, this is where I come back to my whole thesis of the abagenetic evolution of life, is this whole processing of information is unidirectional. Because why is time only going in one direction? Is because we have a memory of what was. Okay. Right. It would be quite different if we'd have a memory of what would be. So causality, you got to really stretch your mind. If you, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm opening a lot of rabbit holes, and I can go into down all of them because I've been thinking about a lot of these things, but it gets really obscure and difficult because we're still living in our life of sciences that are based on this deductive reasoning that actually needs an arrow of time to explain some mechanical processes that we see in our real world. When we come down to the quantum world and the boundary world, this is what interests me. What comes between the quantum world and our how to say, physical world, there must be a certain type of boundaries that expresses itself in a different way. And the only way that I can say the difference is that we have an exclusive access to information that we don't have in the quantum world because it's a probability. And that's really phenomenal. Why is this information very unidirectional and very explicit for our perception in one realm, but not in the other? So that's why I think esoteric and all this phenomenal thing, and it's working itself up the whole our perspective of reality. So yeah, sorry, get you guys lost all the time.
So there we have this topic about UFO encounters, like at the Ariel School or in Australia, like you said. But what is your opinion on alien abductions or cattle mutilations and stuff like that?
Ooh, difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
I really don't know. I don't know.
Do you think there is something to it? Do you think this could be a thing? I mean, there's so many people for so many years claiming that they've been abducted or gotten in contact in some kind of way, got visited at the bedside, or God knows where. There's reports of other stuff too, like Dustin told me about this one UFO case where a UFO came down. It sounds pretty funny, I know, but guys,
oh yeah,
somebody said it happened, and this UFO came down, and this guy was sitting in his kitchen and looking out the window. So in the side with his side eye, he saw this UFO coming down, and those humanoids got out, human-like creatures got out and asked for water, and in exchange for the water, they gave him. Yeah, it sounds funny. They gave him pancakes.
I got pictures of that too.
Wasn't that a film with Dan Aykroyd?
Yeah, it sounds like a little.
That was a film where they had a run and all. He wasn't allowed to spill a glass of water.
Yeah, no, this happened up in Eagle River, Wisconsin, back in 1962. It could be, but anyways, yeah. The story is, like Daniel said, he was eating breakfast in his kitchen, and he happened to notice something coming down like an elevator out his window, and he thought it was something off his roof or something. So he goes outside and he realizes like this flying saucer, and this like little capsule opens up, and two guys, humanoids, came out and didn't say anything the whole time, but just motioned that they wanted some water out of this jug that they were holding up. So after he fetched some water, he came back, and these aliens gave him like little pancakes. Actually, I got pictures of it. But
oh, wait a minute! I heard about something like that. Yeah,
yeah, but they're very
famous case. Yeah.
So he brought it to some scientists and researchers to take some DNA out of it, and they found out that they're regular buckwheat pancakes, but didn't have any trace of salt. But if you think about it, everything on Earth has a trace of salt because of the oceans. And yeah, just the fact that these were out of this world. And if you think about religion with communion, it's almost kind of the same.
You mean to say somebody out of Wisconsin really had space pancakes?
Yeah, I got pictures here.
Cool.
Well,
I heard about space cookies, but I haven't heard about space pancakes.
Yeah. Well, before we get to those cookies, I actually own these photographs. So 2 years ago, when Colonel Wendell Stevens' storage locker was up for bids, and I won a few boxes out of the storage locker bids, and I got over 200 photographs that Colonel Wendell Stevens collected throughout his years of research.
Awesome.
So I have these that I just released recently to the public, and they've been going viral, of this UFO with some kind of jet plane. Yeah, the series of photographs.
Oh God, that's awesome. That's pretty stunning.
Yeah.
Especially because it's an analog photo.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's true.
And these two I have, the series with the F-117 stealth fighter.
Okay. 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 All right. Jesus. Okay. There's a sequence of photos which is extremely interesting.
I think they're great too, especially like I said, because.
But what? Sorry, that's. I'm sorry, Danny. I don't want to interrupt you, but can you go back to the photo before? Sorry,
sure,
Dustin. Now, that airplane up there, that's a relatively recent airplane. That's like a stealth bomber, isn't it?
Yeah, from 1981.
They had stealth bombers 81. I'm sorry, I'm ignorant.
Yeah, well, this is one of the first few flights of the secret stealth bombers from 1981. Yeah, but you could tell that the plane is moving because it's got like a slight blur to it, but then the UFO is somewhat stationary, but it kind of like, moves around different angles. It's kind of like keeping an eye on that jet, making sure it doesn't do something to it. You know what I'm saying? This is another impressive photograph of two housewives that were taking a walk one day, and this is in Mexico somewhere.
I mean, honestly, that looks really fake. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Me too.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't, but
sure.
Yeah, but
I mean, it. On the other hand.
Yeah. Again, this came from the storage locker from a famous UFO researcher, and I don't know. Again, I mean, this is his handwriting in the back of the photograph.
I mean, the question there is the prospectus. I mean, I have to. I saw. Oh wow, what's that?
And this is the man from Eagle River, Wisconsin, that had the contact with the two human ETs that gave him the pancake. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, he actually took a bite of one of these things with the extraterrestrial standing there.
Oh yeah, really?
He said it tasted like a piece of cardboard, and he's like, no wonder they're so small if they're just eating that shit.
Oh,
but no, the guy actually described inside the UFO that he saw from standing outside of it, that there were it was like a flat grill that they were just cooking it on. It was like a flat top. It looked like it was heated. Obviously, it was like.
You mean they flew all the way to Earth to have like a grill out in nature and relax, and we forgot the water. Hey, let's ask this dude.
Again,
some pancake.
If you think about it, with how communion came about in religion, it's almost this
bread and water, yeah,
with the bread and water, right? So again, it kind of makes you think, well, is there a correlation with that?
I you know what? I think these spiritual correlations are not that complex. If you ask yourself inside, they're actually quite simple, and if you're an empathic human being, I mean, I that's really stunning what you just said. I have to digest that a little bit. I mean, coming back to Daniel's questions about the abductions, I have very lucid dreams. I mean, explicit lucid dreams. I used to write them down, and they took pages. I told my wife about that, but this is like, Jesus Christ, when is your story over? Because she knows I like to talk, but I cannot discredit the abduction. There are just too many out there. Too many people that have had this intensive experience. And I again, the question, what is real, what is conscious, and what's the difference? I really think there is something to it, and we'll learn more about it when time goes down. And I think Gary Nolan is the right person to answer those questions, because I think he is an experiencer. I don't know if I'm an experiencer. I need to go into hypnotic regression sometime and find out. As with the cow mutilations, I honestly think it sounds weird, but I think they just take out some tasty things and have a good meal. Honestly, because nothing else makes sense. Nothing else makes sense because like last week we talked about, yes, they're taking the DNA. There's so much DNA floating around, and every breath you take, you're inhaling. I don't know how many DNA from what's
You can
skin
pick
particles.
specific DNA if you take it from a specific
Or
human.
a genetic harvest, basically.
Yeah.
Yes,
for
I
their own
know, but
experiments.
okay, I'm gonna give this presentation about this whole thing. Wait a minute. And this is what really irritates me about this talk about in UFO and UAP. If we're saying they're so far ahead, okay, in which aspect are they far ahead? How far are we to synthesize blood? How far are we to synthesize DNA? How far are we to manipulate DNA? And we're pretty close. It's not so far down the road. So we're talking about an alien species that can bend space and time, is 10,000 years or 100,000 years ahead of us. I don't think they're interested in our DNA.
We try to get DNA from dinosaur bones. So like for research, maybe.
I know, you're totally right. But I'm talking about a civilization that's 10,000 years ahead, that they have a computer and artificial intelligence that we're creating that spits it out in whatever, a 3D printer, the question is, how far are things ahead and how far can we understand it? And I think I give you this example. If we would be in the 1920s, how much of our technology would they be able to recognize? That's like 100 years ago. Do you think?
Good question. What's your thoughts?
Good question. What are your thoughts? I love Daniel. He knows how to play tennis. He keeps on returning. He's like Björn Björk. He keeps on hitting that ball back. You just run left and right. You try to keep up with the game.
Just don't want to step into the shit,
Yeah, I know. Avoid stepping into the shit. But that's what life is about. It's like walking in the park at night. You never know when you're going to step into some dog shit or not. But the question is, at one point, in civilization, there's our understanding of science and there's our reproduction of science, okay? Our reproduction of science, I estimate, is always about 100 years behind what we intellectually can do, okay? We can talk about that in detail later on. Now, if we're talking about a society, a civilization that is another 100 years ahead of us, how much of that can we recognize? There are certain aspects of that technology that we can recognize because it interacts with our environment. Obviously, those interactions we can recognize. That's just what I'm speculating, what we are measuring right now. That's what we're calling the phenomenon in different ways. If it is 10,000 years ahead of us, holy moly. If there's a civilization that can last for 10,000 years and not kill each other off like we do, they have number one, a whole different psychological interpretation of an individual and of civilization on and of the other. Is this benevolent? I don't know, but I would suspect so, and I would hope so, because if it isn't, then there are probably only 3 beings left because they killed off the rest. Okay. Then the other aspect is, in which level of technologies can we evolve? I'm trying to condense all these crazy thoughts that I have. Okay, if we take a look at technological, we'd have to accept that they're pretty much technological ahead of us because they're able to come here through space and time and dimensions or whatever time to get here. So technologically, they must be advanced. Okay. How far, if you are technologically advanced, how far does your biological understanding come with you? Okay, so I would say we're right now that actually biology is overtaking our technological advancements because technologically, well, it's kind of, yeah, we got the internet, but it's still electromagnetic, still bound to Einsteinian philosophy and field equations, so on and so forth, 100 years old. But biologically, we're sequencing the DNA. We're actually thinking about how the brain works, how the neural network works, our bodies and everything, the proteins and so on. So actually, biologically, we're getting ahead. So eventually, you move up. At one point, if we cannot detect the technology anymore, they don't need our DNA. I think quite probably the bigger understanding of what they're interested in our DNA is the influences they can take, okay, in our consciousness and biological being. Maybe that would be an aspect because it might be different to theirs, okay? But if we're taking a look at what AI can do right now and what it can do in 100 years, what it can do in 1,000 years, and what it can do in 10,000 years, those questions are irrelevant because it would be able to do it anyway. It doesn't need us, okay? The only aspect why it needs us is that we're still conscious and interacting in our reality, and that's what they're interested in. Is okay, which things can we poke and influence, and what happens out of that? It's like a game, all right? Kind of. This is all very condensed. This is one thing we've got to accept. If technology is so far ahead of us, certain questions that we think what they're doing to us are irrelevant because we don't understand it, because they can do it to a certain extent way beyond us that we can actually understand it, because we're getting there ourselves. We're getting there ourselves, that we can understand that what the DNA sequencing means. What does consciousness mean in this whole DNA Tumanga in us, in ourselves, okay? Which influences can we take? So we're in there. If you're 100 years ahead, maybe we can recognize it a certain, if they're 10,000, 100,000, 100,000 years ahead of us, like a lot of people say, it's a whole different content. But in this aspect, and this is where the thinking comes along when I looked at Robin Hanson, is if we're taking a look at civilizations that are really expanding through the universe, that may be visiting us, okay? The question is, in how far does a civilization that expands over a vast realm of the universe or a galaxy, and that is expanding, does each individual have psychological, emotional, philosophical still connection to where it came from? So then the question becomes, in which way does their mind work? Does their mind is it a hive mind that they're like, no matter where they are, they're still, attached to Akasha or whatever you want to call it, in some kind of consciousness where they're combined, so they're still living? Or is this individual that's going out in space and time just on his own? He's like the lone rider. Is like, I'm somewhere out there in Utah, my Harley Davidson, and I don't know what's happening in New York, So that could be it, that these UFOs are just flying around. They don't have any contact. I don't know. But we must accept the fact that if they're ahead of us, certain questions that we think might be prevalent to them are actually irrelevant to them because they can do it anyway. And that's kind of my philosophy. If they're 100 years or 200 years ahead of us, it's a different question. And this is a whole different type of philosophy that I've been tried to get into the conversation with Avi Loeb and Robin Hanson. The question is that the only species that we should fear are the species that are not so far ahead of us, maybe 100 years, maybe 200 years ahead of us, because they're not that evolved. A species that is 10,000 years, 100,000, or 1,000,000 years more evolved than we are, they have a total perspective that, wow, Jesus, I don't know if there's a drug out there that would make us understand it, that's way beyond us. But a species that are 100 or 200 years ahead of us, those we must fear because they're technologically ahead of us, but they might have the same still primitive impetus of survivability as we do. And that's kind of like a core of my thinking. Yeah, well, okay, here I go again.
But that's just assumptions.
Of course.
Of course. And I get the idea. And I think you're totally right. But going back to the dinosaurs.
Yeah, isn't that
how
amazing?
Ahead are we to the dinosaurs, and we still want to extract DNA? Or another example. Let's say we find a primitive being on Mars, very primitive being on Mars, like a little animal, like mouse-like animal, we would also try to catch it and extract DNA and see what it's made of. I mean, it's research. And I don't think I think it doesn't matter how far ahead you are. If you find something interesting, you want to know what it's made of, or like you said, what you can do with it, what could be a use for it, stuff like that.
I think out of my current perspective, I think you're totally right. I totally believe that. But as for the dinosaur DNA, it's because we're just right now dabbling with the DNA. We want to say, hey, wow, can we like have a Tyrannosaurus Rex or Jurassic Park somewhere on running around? Can we do that? We're kind of like still this infantile kid trying to do all this stuff, you know?
We don't need it. We don't really need it.
Well, who knows? Dinosaurs. Brontosaurus steak might be pretty good, you know.
But we want to have it. We want to research on it, but we don't really need. Do we need it? Like,
no,
but we do it anyways.
You know where you're so right, and this is where I always run around in circles. The biggest phenomenon in me is this abstract. I mean, I deal in art now. Abstract thinking of human beings is such a creative thing that we can't get a hand of it. And I think this is where actually science sometimes runs down because they've become so, you know, I think the great scientists are those that don't give a shit anymore. They just say whatever they think. But I think we're still dabbling about it. But what I'm getting at is that if we have, I think there will always be curiosity in which way certain genetic combinations create certain awarenesses and perception of reality and consciousness. I think that will always be the game, and I think that's what's going on. I totally agree with you. But I think after a certain progression of civilization, technology, and intelligence, I don't think that's necessary anymore. I think actually the influences taken are not going to be on a DNA level. I think it'll be on a whole different level, because I think, as I said on the beginning, I think consciousness is on you know, there's Bewusstsein, as I said, this is our awareness level, you know, and there's this consciousness level that is above us. That's the way I would like to describe it. And I think these are mechanisms that we're beginning to understand right now. We're understanding it on a psychological level. C.G. Jung talked about it and everything. So I think we're just getting there. But I think personally, if we talk about a civilization that's so far above us, if I just look at what AI can do right now, it's stunning. I saw this one guy on Twitter. He actually asked this ChatGPT for every nation to give a picture of a supervillain. And it was really interesting, because that's a very interesting question. Because the artificial intelligence has to ask itself, okay, what does this country represent? Supervillain is actually more interesting than the superhero, okay? Because the supervillain looks also on the dark side of every nation's past. And then it gave images of every nation. And I went through and I was like, wow, that's really fast. That's really creative. That's awesome. It was incredible what it generated. Now, if I extrapolate that, if you take this artificial intelligence and you go beyond these boundaries, and it can go not only to, because it showed me that it can take an historic path, put a kind of an idealism on top of it, and represent something with that. That's an incredible process. And if AI is capable of doing that, then I think in 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000, we're talking about, some people are talking about that these things have been around for millions of years and influencing our DNA, you know, then I think that happens on a whole total different level. I mean, coming back to the dinosaurs, what I'm really asking myself, how the hell is 180 million years wasted on, I don't know, big, huge animals walking around, just eating each other, eating whatever is around, and not contemplating about the complexities of life. I think that is really the big question: is why the hell did we spend 180 million years just doing that?
Yeah. Have you seen the movie that just came out called 65?
No, I didn't.
You should check that out. It is absolutely amazing. It's one of my new favorite movies. It's about ancient astronauts that crash land onto Earth 65 million years ago with dinosaurs. And there's only a few survivors. And you kind of think of the same concept. It's with David Driver. I'm sorry, not David, Adam Driver.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, the concept, maybe it could have been the same exact thing. They were kind of like the refugees of an alien race that crash landed here a long time ago and lost all the technology, and they had to start from scratch, basically.
How would you do that?
How would you do that?
Yeah. Well, how did ancient man move like 70 tons of blocks across deserts and different terrains? Honestly, I don't know, like how, I don't know. I mean, they could have been extraterrestrial themselves. Who knows?
That's one of the things that I really got interested in lately. I'm a geologist, and if you take a big, we had like this 10-kilo hammer, and you hit the rocks, so you want to take some samples, hit on a piece of granite. I invite anybody to do that. Go down to your whatever store, get yourself a big, huge ass hammer, and go to a big, heavy granite rock and hit on it. See what difference you make. Zero. Yeah. Nothing. Just the slightest little thing splinters off. It is crazy. And then when I go down to my museum here, I was in Egypt once, only for a day, unfortunately, on business trip many years ago. But when I go down to the museum here and I look at the sarcophag, where a mummy was inside, the walls perfectly straight, 90 degrees, and then the front side curve, and it's like perfect, and it's polished, and it's diorite. That MF is so hard. And you may not forget, that was Egyptians' time. That was Bronze Age. They didn't have bloody steel or iron.
No.
How the hell? And then I look at recently, I forgot these two young blokes. They actually took one of these granite vases and they had the 3D scanned. I forgot their names, but it doesn't matter. They made a 3D scan, how perfectly it was made and polished. People, I tell you, that is not explicable. I cannot, out of a pure sense, I'm not very handy man. I don't know. I'm not very talented in this, but it's phenomenal.
No, think about the H blocks in Pumapunku. They're like prefabricated blocks that just look like they just came out of a machine, but like so intricately cut. And then you look at their toolbox and you only see chicken bones and dental floss. And you're like, what the fuck is going on?
The same with Egypt. And you must think, okay, let alone. I'm not even talking about the whole tools that they needed to just excavate one of those big, huge, 700 tons blocks. I'm not even talking about it. If you want to polish them down, as the sarcophag that I see in my museum here, if you want to polish it, you need material to polish. Okay. I'm sure somewhere in the sands, you must find whatever they use to polish it. I mean, they can't find the tools, but at least tell me what the hell is the polishing material with which you polish it. Polishing is a very hard thing to do.
Right.
It is really hard. And I don't get it. I sincerely do. And I think Graham Hancock and I think it was Randy Carlson, I saw them on Joey Rogan, and they were talking about it's quite probably that civilization is way older than we think it is. And I guarantee you that they're right. I personally, I would put all my money on it almost. I definitely think it is. Is it an alien civilization? I don't think so. I think we would have some sort of geological or some type of marker to identify them. Unless it's what you said, that they crash landed here and they said, oh, holy shit. Our spacecraft is broken. Nothing's left. What do we do? Let's see what we can do with what we got here. That's a possibility. But let's say an alien civilization that uses energy technology that we know in a certain extent, I I think we would see some type of marker in some kind of in the last 10, in Antarctica, they did enough drilling that, everything you do mechanically somehow gets into the atmosphere. And if it's a mechanical process of some type of machinery, there will be a marker somewhere. I know maybe not a lot of scientists have been looking for it. Maybe they should take another look at the records, and maybe they'll say, holy shit, look at this, the way we got whatever. I mean, it's the same thing when we talked about, the extinction of the dinosaur with the comet that came. Only then they just started to look at the, and the boundary, the carbon KT, what do you call it in English? I forgot it, and I learned it in German, so I can't remember. So in this boundary area, they look for iridium. Iridium is something that you would find in a higher concentration when an asteroid crashes and it comes into the. They didn't look for that before, and then they found these markers all over the world in the same type of boundary levels. And extinction levels. Okay, so maybe we should take another look. What type of materials should we be looking for? Maybe in Antarctic ice drills that maybe range back 10, 15, 20,000 years. Maybe we find some markers. Then I would revisit the idea and say maybe there was a higher technology. Up to now, it was not found. Okay, but I don't think we've been looking for it either. That's quite honest.
But if it was very long ago, we couldn't find it anyways, because we can only trace this stuff back like 2 or 3 million years, which is a long time. But if it was before, so
well, it depends what you look for. I mean, if we're looking for something like let's say some higher concentration of I'm grappling right now. Some type of metals, that hard metals, whatever, or wolfram, or I don't know. Something that would have to do with and some type of markers. Okay, I think we could find them also a lot earlier. C14 gets difficult because the half-life time is too short if we're talking about millions of years. But I think in 10, 20, 30, 50,000 years, we could find a lot of stuff. If we're looking for other materials, it will get difficult with interpretation. This is why I'm very interested. I, as a geologist, would like to ask Gary Nolan, what the hell are you looking for? Because if you look at the nature of reality, if you look at mineralogy, it's very precise. The minerals grow after very precise symmetries. It's incredible, actually. The fundamentals of our Earth is incredible. Every rock is built up of minerals, and every mineral is very, very, very precise. You can look through the microscope and detect what type of minerals are according to their optical properties, which depend on their atomic structures, and the atomic structures are very precisely crystallographic in a crystallographic system. So it's actually very phenomenal. So if you look at certain minerals, they're very, 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 you can look at a muscovite, you can take it apart, you can look through it, they're in layers, they're very precise, they're a very specific combination and constellation of the atomic structure. So if I'm looking at that alien stuff, I'm gonna have to ask myself, what do I really have to look for to actually make it alien? So that's even in science, you have the problem. If you're looking, that's why I'm saying in the biological sense, it would be easier to prove alien presence because they nuked our brain or DNA or something, and there is like, whoa, look, 10% of our DNA is like from viruses. I mean, that's incredible. We don't even know if viruses are alive. They go around, inject their bloody DNA in us, and we mutate because of them in a certain aspect. Can we find other aspects of our DNA? Probably, that could indicate that there was an influence, probably, in our brain structure and so on. More likely than in all these other questions, unless maybe James Webb catches up on a radio message from some alien, music show on some alien planet. That's of course I think that would be the easier way, or finding an artifact like Oumuamua, and we bump into it and we lock onto it and we can open up a door and walk inside. I think those would be a lot easier to accept as being alien in nature. All other indicators are very difficult scientifically to really say 100%, look, we're talking about this has to be an alien technology, even if you look at a marker that is so many years ago. So I think that the scientific process is going to be quite difficult. Even if we're looking at the phenomena like at Hesta and Skinwalker Ranch and all the other things that we're filming, I think we're documenting reactions in our environment, in our reality of something else, but it doesn't explicitly tell us what that something else is. So that's going to be the difficult step to go beyond that. What the hell is that? So we're faced with a lot of problems on our world on a physical, scientific level to actually prove, hey, dudes, man, this is alien and we can prove it. This is it. It's going to be a long way there.
Mhm.
So my final question is, because we've been rapping for some time, do you think in our lifetime we're going to find out?
I think so. I hope so. It's because this slow drip, now that the government is talking that we can't explain what these things are, and we're shooting them down now, and not, telling us that they're picking up all these things that they're shooting down. It's just, yeah, something's gonna pop.
I think.
How long do you, Daniel? What do you think?
I think yes.
In your lifetime?
Yes, I'm sure.
How many years do we have to wait, do you think?
I'd give it, well, with all this stuff that happened the last few years, I'd say, yeah, maybe I'm stepping in the shit right now, but I'd say 3 to 8 years.
Dustin,
we know everything.
Yeah, maybe
Dustin?
10 years. Probably 10 years.
Interesting. I'm with Daniel. I think within the next 5 years we're gonna have a big question in front of us.
Yeah.
I think
The fact that this subject is never going to go away.
Yeah.
It's here to stay. So again, it's going to happen regardless.
Regardless.
Yeah.
I like that. I think it's inevitable. It's like, who was as Thanos said in
Yeah.
I'm inevitable. I think the alien truth is inevitable. I think, I think let's call it a night for that. I think before my ganglia is totally melting together in one big black hole and it's sucking me up and I'm disappearing in my own reality. And I don't think I like that. I'd rather be in you guys' reality. Anyways, thanks for the conversation. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Thank you. It was great. It was a great talk. We learned a lot today, and you know what? We really would love to discuss the Billy Meyer case with you, and this was my plan for today, but we didn't touch it. But
I'm sorry.
I think you have some great thoughts on the Billy Meyer case, but let's do it the next time.
I would love to do that anytime, Daniel. Dustin, I'm on board.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Great.
Just give me a call. All right.
Yeah, that was good. Thank you.
Thanks. Cheers. Bye.
Yeah. Have a
Peace
good day.
and love.